This right here is Todd Bertuzzi, and over here is Steve Moore, and what's about to happen next will change both of these players' lives forever. This moment is one of the most tragic and unfortunate events in NHL history, but to understand exactly how we got here, we need to rewind a little bit. Hockey is often described as the fastest game on earth. It's a game that highlights the talent of players, but it also has its own dark side. In the NHL, toughness is a badge of honor, but sometimes the line between a good hard play and violence gets blurred, and in those moments, tragedy can strike. One such moment occurred on March 8, 2004, in a game between the Vancouver Canucks and the Colorado Avalanche. It was a moment that would not only end one player's career, but would also forever tarnish another's legacy. Todd Bertuzzi's infamous sucker punch on Steve Moore is remembered as one of the NHL's darkest moments, and it was the unfortunate outcome of several weeks of tension building up. The story begins a couple of weeks before the incident, on February 16, 2004. Late in the first period, with the puck loose in the neutral zone, the Avalanche's Steve Moore delivered a huge hit on Naslund, shocking everybody in the arena. There was no penalty on the play, but for the Canucks, it was a cheap shot on their best player, and they were going to make sure Moore paid the price. Naslund suffered a concussion and a chipped elbow bone as a result of the hit, and that forced him to miss the next 3 games. While the league's Department of Player Safety reviewed the play, they ultimately decided not to suspend Moore, concluding that the hit thrown did not break any of the rules. This decision only added fuel to the fire. The Canucks organization and their fans were furious, feeling that the league had failed to protect one of its biggest stars. Head coach Mark Crawford was particularly vocal with his anger, calling the non-call an embarrassment. Canucks GM Brian Burke joined in criticizing the league while the players took matters into their own hands. Brad May was known as being an enforcer with the Canucks, and he told reporters that there was now a bounty on Steve Moore's head. Todd Bertuzzi, who many know as one of the league's most feared and aggressive power forwards, called Moore a piece of garbage and made it clear that revenge was coming. In the weeks following the Naslund hit, the Canucks and Avalanche faced each other once more, but the animosity between the teams remained largely under the surface. During this game, there were a few skirmishes and exchanges, but nothing that escalated into a full-blown brawl. However, the Canucks made it clear that they hadn't forgotten about Moore, and many expected the next game to be far more explosive. For the Avalanche, the priority was winning, especially considering it wasn't their guy that went down with an injury. But for the Canucks, revenge was becoming a distraction, and one that would ultimately lead to a total disaster. By the time the Canucks and Avalanche met again on March 8, 2004, the tension was immeasurable. Rogers Arena in Vancouver was packed with fans expecting fireworks while both teams were fighting for playoff positioning. From the opening faceoff, it was clear that the Canucks had one goal, which was to make sure Steve Moore paid for his hit on Naslund. As the game wore on, the Avalanche began to dominate. They climbed all the way to an 8-2 lead by the third period, turning the game into a blowout. With the outcome all but decided, the Canucks shifted their focus entirely to revenge, and Todd Bertuzzi took it upon himself to settle the score. If for whatever reason you're not familiar with Bertuzzi, he was listed at 6'3" and around 240 pounds. He was an elite player and one of the most dominant power forwards of the era, but he also had a huge reputation as having a bit of a short fuse and a willingness to walk the line. As the clock ticked down in the third period, Bertuzzi began shadowing Moore, taunting him and challenging him to fight. Moore refused to engage, skating away from Bertuzzi's antics, but finally, when there was just over 10 minutes remaining on the clock, Bertuzzi snapped. He skated up behind Moore before grabbing him by the back of his jersey. He then delivered a vicious sucker punch to the side of Moore's head. Bertuzzi landed on top of him, driving his head into the ice once again. Several other players piled on, and it resulted in total chaos. The aftermath was terrifying. Moore was laying motionless on the ice with blood pooling around his head. Trainers and medical staff from both teams rushed to his aid, and the arena fell silent as the gravity of the situation had become apparent to everybody. After several minutes, Moore was stretchered off the ice and taken to the hospital. The game resumed after a lengthy delay, but the focus was no longer on the scoreboard. The fans, players, and coaches were just left in shock, understanding the reality of what had just happened. For Steve Moore, the injuries were catastrophic. With just this one punch, Moore's NHL career was over. Video of the incident circulated widely, and the backlash against Bertuzzi was hefty. Within hours, the NHL announced that Bertuzzi had been suspended indefinitely, pending a full investigation of the incident. The Canucks organization faced scrutiny, with many questioning whether Crawford and Burke had anything to do with Bertuzzi's antics. The incident turned legal. In 2004, Bertuzzi was charged with assault causing bodily harm, a criminal offense under Canadian law. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 year of probation and 80 hours of community service. Meanwhile, Steve Moore filed a civil lawsuit against Bertuzzi and the Canucks seeking $68 million in damages. The battle dragged on for a decade, facing a number of delays and complications before finally in 2014 reaching a confidential settlement. For Steve Moore, the attack was life-altering. In interviews, Moore has spoken about the emotional toll of the incident, describing the difficulty of adjusting to life without the game he loved. Despite the financial settlement, Moore has expressed frustrations with the NHL, arguing that the league failed to hold Bertuzzi and the Canucks accountable for what had happened. 2 decades later, the Bertuzzi-Moore incident remains one of the darkest moments in league history. It's a reminder of how going over the line on the ice can have some really serious consequences that, let's be honest, nobody wanted to see in this situation. For the NHL, it was a wake-up call, and it prompted changes to make the game safer for new generations. But for those directly involved, the scars, both physical and emotional, are permanent. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content.